SaaS is not going away. I don't believe in the meme of everyone's going to be vibe coding everything. I think it's a security nightmare. You're not vibe coding Salesforce, right? Like that's just a ridiculous notion. One of the most fundamental things with AI and getting all these agentic workflows working is the data, right? Like none of this works that well without having a really strong data pipeline. AI could hallucinate or give you wrong answers. Or if you're trying to set up AI role plays and it doesn't have good data to back up like real life scenarios, it's going to be bad. So data is the fundamental fuel behind all this agentic stuff.
One thing you've said to me previously is AI is kind of both overhyped and underhyped.
It's easy to feel, and I feel this all the time, that like we're super, super behind. We've already missed the AI wave. Like you see all these messages of all these amazing things that people are doing, and it feels like people are super advanced. But then like you actually start to talk to customers, and it's like still super underutilized.
If you were an enablement leader right now, what does sort of like a healthy approach to AI look like right now?
I wouldn't just go buy software that checks the box, honestly.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Grow and Tell. I'm your sometimes co-host, Eric Doty, head of marketing at Doc, with Alex Kracov, the CEO and co-founder of Doc. Hello, Alex. How are you?
Doing good. What's up, everybody?
So today we're going to finally talk about the topic that our audience has been absolutely clamoring for, our huge listenership, the current and near future state of AI in sales enablement. I'm sure it's not the last time we'll talk about it. It's not the first time, but this is our first fully dedicated episode to the topic. Before we get started, I did want to call out Alex. It's our 50th episode.
Wow.
We made it.
We've been doing this for that long. That's crazy.
I know.
Yeah.
When you started Doc, you're like, I hope I start a podcast that reaches 50 episodes. And there you go. You achieved your dream.
Yeah. I mean, I am proud we've like stuck with it. I mean, it's so easy to, I wonder how many podcasts get to 50 episodes, you know? Like, I feel like a lot of people start and stop because it's hard, and we're getting there.
Your head of marketing did this research, okay? Yeah. I looked it up. Apparently, it's like approximately 9%.
Okay.
It feels too high, but I feel like, okay, we're in the top 10%.
I thought I'd be in the 1% at least, you know? Yeah. But
yeah.
I'll take it. We'll get to 100 and then we'll be good.
Yeah, we'll get there. All right. Okay. Back to AI. To set the stakes here, we're like 3 years into the ChatGPT era. It's crazy. It's already been that long. And not to say the dust has completely settled, but I feel like there was maybe 2 years of chaos where we're not sure what the AI future was going to look like. And I feel like we have like a little more clarity of the vision now. And so, you and I have talked a lot off air about AI. And in my opinion, like you've had a very kind of like level-headed take this whole time on like what the AI will do to the sales enablement industry, like what it will do for Doc, and like obviously what it'll do for SaaS in general. So I feel like you're a good person to talk to about like the future of AI. And I think our goal, we were just talking before we started, is I think like the average sales enablement person listening to this show will probably feel like a little uneasy or uncertain from like a career perspective, right? Of like, what should I pay attention to? Like, what's a waste of my time? What tools should I use? What should I not use? And so we just maybe not answer all those questions, but at least like give a bit more sense of calm to that sort of uncertainty, if that makes sense.
Yeah, excited to get into it.
So like right off the bat, I think one thing you've said to me previously is that AI is kind of both overhyped and underhyped right now. And I think it's helpful if you just talk about that for our listeners.
Yeah, it's something I really believe, and I'm glad we're starting with this question because it's easy to feel, and I feel this all the time as a founder of a SaaS AI company, right? That like we're super, super behind, right? Like that we've already missed the AI wave. Like if you go on X, Twitter, LinkedIn, you see all these messages of all these amazing things that people are doing with AI, and it feels like people are super advanced. But then like you actually start to talk to customers, both, we talk a lot on this podcast with different enablement leaders or customers as we're selling Doc, and it's like still super underutilized and people are still really figuring it out how it works. And it's a really nascent technology. And the people we talk with are usually some of the most forward-thinking folks kind of, in the world when it comes to AI. And actually even one tiny little anecdote is I was at a wedding, last weekend, and somebody was talking about illness or whatever, and I was like, oh, you could just chat GPT it, and she had made a comment like, oh, but it'll just tell me I have cancer, right? And like that is such an old way of thinking. That was like the WebMD joke, right? Like no matter what I search, WebMD is going to tell me I have cancer. I have a headache. I have cancer. And it's like, no, ChatGPT actually gives really nuanced, answers around medical stuff. And like this person lived, not in San Francisco or New York. Maybe they're more like middle America. And it's like this technology and the power of it just hasn't gotten to most of the world, even though if you live in San Francisco, if you work in technology, it can feel like you're really behind. And so it feels like, overhyped in the short term of, like everyone's using it, it's changing the world, like I'm gaining so much revenue and it's doing all these amazing things. But it's still such early days and there's still so much to build. As someone who's spending most of my time trying to build these different features, like we're just not there yet. There's so much things when it comes to the agentic infrastructure. Everyone's talking about agents, but if you're actually trying to build these things, we have a long way to go to kind of get there. I mean, it does feel like, we're, I don't know, the .com era, right, is the easy analogy. And, that boomed and bust, but then a lot of amazing stuff was built in the 20 years after that. And so we got a long way to go to kind of like take this nugget of technology and make it incredibly useful for, all of society, but then also like the go-to-market organizations.
I had a similar experience recently where a teacher friend of mine was doing report cards, and it's one of those tasks that it's very templated in that like there's only so many things that her board of education or whatever lets her say, and there's only so many like variants of what there's like 5 buckets of what you can say for each. And she's like, I tried ChatGPT in the past, it doesn't work. And I was like, well, what if you like pre-built a spreadsheet where you're like, here's the things I want to say, and I sort of walked her through the use case, and then she came back to me a day later and she's like, I vibe coded this whole thing with Claude and I was able to do my report cards in 2 hours. And so I think there's this like consumer experience of even just trying ChatGPT for the very first time 3 years ago to like what's possible now. And so I think that like each person has experienced that like overhype, underhype cycle too.
Totally. Like there's 2 different dynamics happening. One is like people are learning how to use these tools better, right? And that template example, and how do you do it? And how do you use source material and guide kind of the AI to what you want it to do? But then the models are just getting better themselves. I mean, like in the engineering world, coding has blown up since I think it was like the Sonnet update in November of last year. And it's crazy how much it's transformed engineering, right? And so the things that you could, put in Claude Code or Cursor, a year ago that weren't possible and buggy and didn't work insanely well today. And so if you're the type of person where you sort of rely on that past experience, like, oh, that's how it used to work, it's just not true. Like this technology is evolving so fast. And that's like, I think it's hard for human brains to like wrap their heads around it. We just like, we kind of like, we use something, we're like, oh, that's how it always works. But the pace of change is like exponential. And we're as humans are bad at kind of understanding exponential change.
Yeah. Especially with software, right? Like you download a tool and you try it and you say, oh, I don't like it. I don't like the way it works. You're not going to pop into it a year later and say, I hope it's better now. Like that's not a thing. It's not a way that we used to experience software. And so that does lead me into my sort of first big question for you here. And like, can you just talk about the AI landscape right now? Like the sort of tool stack in terms of like when you look at the market, we're in the end of March recording here, 2026. Like what are the big use cases that you see are like taking the most hold already? And then maybe like where is there still lots of opportunity where a lot of enablement teams haven't gone yet?
Yeah. So we've been interviewing a lot of enablement folks trying to get a sense of, okay, like how much are they using AI at their companies? And maybe we'll separate it into like 2 buckets. There's the way that the enablement teams themselves are using AI. And then there's the way that their sales teams that they're enabling are using AI. So on the sales side, I think there's like a lot of stuff happening at the top of the funnel. Right? Like outbound emails, right? The classic, I think the first use case was like, help me write a better outbound email, or help me take some data and then let's personalize it with AI. And there's a bunch of interesting companies like, Unify or Gong who are doing different things there where, trying to take different signals, maybe you're using AI to sift through all those signals, write better outbound messaging and do different triggers there. And I think that's working pretty well. Although what's interesting, I think, is as humans, we're getting pretty good at detecting like AI slop versus like a handwritten human email. So I think I don't know, it's an interesting dynamic that we're still wrapping our heads around. I think that's one big use case that we see in sales teams. The other one is all of the account research that happens. We've talked to a lot of folks where it's like, okay, their AEs are getting AI written reports with, here's all the meetings that you have this week. Here's the status of those deals. Managers are getting those, right? A lot of like account research, or maybe it's more like, hey, we read through all of the, stuff about this company on the internet. Here's a little, thing that talks about their business goals and stuff like that. So a lot of the account research that you would do to prep for a new deal or an existing deal, is being automated by AI with some of like the most advanced teams. The other thing that's kind of similar to that is like handoff notes. And so, like transitioning from sales to customer success, salespeople would have to write a bunch of, handoff notes and, handwrite that. And now you can automate a lot of that, or at least give them a head start to the CS. And then maybe the third bucket where I see a lot of usage is like CRM updating. Nobody wants to update Salesforce, and AI can really help you do that. Actually, one more, which, I think Doc is helping to lead the way on, is like content generation, right? And so, you have tools like Gamma who are doing this in the slide deck world. But I think, where Doc has found like a nice little niche is around customer facing collateral, right? Taking, things like your Gong call and then creating a business case or a customer success plan or an executive summary or a project plan. And that's one way like our customers are really using kind of Doc today as they work with customers, right? The sales rep side. And then there's the enablement side of things, where I still feel like it is somewhat nascent, although the big pattern is like Gong and conversational intelligence, right? Like we just hear that again and again on calls. On these podcasts, like calls are the central artifact of a lot of the AI usage. And Gong is an example that does keep coming up again and again. But I think, it was really hard to do enablement back in the day if you had 1,000 sellers on calls and you had no insight into what was actually happening on those calls. You would do a training, then these calls would happen, and you wouldn't really know if they were doing a good job or not. Like when I started my career at Yelp, I would have managers like barging into my call, which was very distracting. Like that was kind of how you did it. But now enablement leaders can get insights, using a tool like Gong across 1,000 different calls with all their sellers, and get a sense of how well people are doing, right? And are they, like the product certification that you just did on the new product, are they actually following through with that? Are they, hey, I'm a new rep, am I actually, doing a good demo? Like the conversational intelligence is definitely the main tool enablement folks are using. And a bridge off of that, and I think we'll talk more and more about this, is like AI role play, which is, the enablement folks are really excited about AI role play. Sellers, I think there's different opinions on how excited they are to actually use it. But I think that's a really interesting dynamic that we hear a lot about.
And then in terms of like up and coming opportunities or like areas where you feel like are maybe underutilized, but like maybe like I'm thinking of CMS, for example, of like people probably aren't like clamoring for like, I want my CMS to be more AI powered, but there's probably lots of like gains there to be made. The people who are like, you have your workflow, so you're used to it. So you're not necessarily needing AI in your mind, but there's gains there. So like, what are those kinds of categories too?
I mean, to be honest, I think we're still figuring out, but I think the broadest category, maybe taking a step back from like exact like enablement categories, but I think there's a lot of lessons to learn with what is happening in like the vibe coding or like, real coding space, where you have these agentic editors and then you can run a bunch of agents in parallel and they run off and do a bunch of things, right? Or you have, like Linear has a thing which is issue tracking. I create an issue tracker and then it goes and tries to actually fix the issue. And then, a human will actually review the code. So there's a lot of this like AI agents running out into the world and doing things for you, which, to some degree is happening, with the deal review stuff and whatever. But I think there's a long way to go in the types of technologies that companies can build, where you have a bunch of, little go-to-market agents running around in the background, trying to do things, alerting people, like both creating work and maybe even doing selling or customer success themselves, but then also sharing information. And a lot of that hasn't been built out or imagined yet. Like one thing that we are really trying to invest in at Doc personally, and I'm spending a lot of time on, is, I guess one of the barriers to entry to kind of getting started with Doc, although it's pretty easy, we have templates, is getting your stuff into Doc, right? Like you need to build a deal room template or an onboarding template. And so one of the things we're investing a lot into is how do we just like take a dump of your source material, your marketing website, your pitch deck, your videos, all the stuff, you just throw it into Doc, and then boom, our agents will go and scan through all of that, splice it out, and then create, propose a deal room template, create it for you, and then you can edit it via agents. And so, we're spending a lot of time on like that type of thing. And that's very unique to Doc. But I think that type of pattern of less you clicking the UI, more agents doing things is going to take over all of go-to-market, right? It's not going to be just on the deal room side of things, but it could be like, hey, help manage my entire CMS. Help me spin up a training, right? Like, hey, go listen to all the gong calls, take all that, figure out the things that everyone's getting wrong, propose a training outline, make a perfect training, make a quiz, send it to people. Like that type of thing starts to get a lot easier. Whereas in the past, you would have to it would take weeks, right? You'd have to listen to calls and figure it out and propose and meet and stuff. And like, it's going to really kind of cut that time from, idea of something I want to do to activation. And I think this like agentic infrastructure everyone's building out is going to be the huge opportunity over the next couple of years.
So I think that leads me to my next kind of category of questions, which is like, if you're an enablement leader thinking about your tech stack, like I think the big question right now is like, where should the AI live, or like how is this going to shake out in terms of like, is the tech stack ultimately going to be a bunch of data with a bunch of like internally vibe coded things with Claude or ChatGPT, or are the SaaS companies going to build some layer? Like how do you see this actually shaking out? And then I think a question we talked about too before we started recording is like, where does RevOps fit into this? Where does like who should own this stack? I know I'm throwing a lot of questions at once, but I think like, can you paint a picture of how might this world shake out?
So I think like one of the most fundamental things with AI and getting all these agentic workflows working is the data, right? Like none of this works that well without having a really strong data pipeline, right? Like AI could hallucinate or give you wrong answers, or if you're trying to send outbound emails based off AI, if your data is bad, the email is going to be bad. Or if you're trying to set up AI role plays and it doesn't have good data to back up like real life scenarios, it's going to be bad. So data is the fundamental, fuel right behind all this agentic stuff. And so that's like the first step to kind of get right in a lot of the things, to build a lot of the product experiences. And that, traditionally has been a little bit more of like a RevOps function, right? But also cross into engineering and stuff. And so oftentimes what we found is RevOps teams are the ones who are really owning that data layer. They own the data, and then they will partner with enablement to start to build sort of like the productized experiences for the internal team. And then like some enablement people are calling themselves enablement, but they honestly start to feel a little bit more like RevOps, right? What's interesting, so that's one pattern. Another pattern I've seen is a lot of companies are developing these like AI committees or AI excellence teams or whatever. The CEO is super excited about AI. They're like, everyone needs to use more AI, and they'll spin up a committee to do this. Because there also is this interesting dynamic of going back to the data is, does the data all need to be centralized across the entire company? Can there be some silos between go-to-market and the company? And how does that work? And should we buy a universal agentic thing like a Glean that sits across all company data, or do we have more specific systems for specific teams? And in some ways, there's like, we're all figuring it out. There's no quite right or wrong answer. There's pros and cons to each approach, and depending on how your team sets it up and the different workflows and different tools you use. But I imagine like a future where SaaS is not going away. I don't believe in the meme of everyone's going to be vibe coding everything. I think it's a security nightmare. I think it's a lot of work. It's a lot to maintain. For all the reasons you didn't build custom software yourself in the future, you might build like little apps, but the big things, you're not vibe coding Salesforce, right? Like that's just a ridiculous notion. And Yeah, so I don't think that's the future. I think the future looks more like SaaS products really change, and if you're a SaaS product who isn't adapting to this AI future and generative AI, you're not building those kind of agentic workflows native to your core products, you're probably going to die. And then you're going to have a bunch of SaaS products with agents that are all talking to each other. Whether it's an MCP or API, I think we'll all figure it out. But yeah, it'll look like the Doc agent is talking to the Salesforce agent and the HubSpot agent, and different things like that. So I think, in some parts it'll be more, bundled together. Like every software cycle is bundling and unbundling, and we're probably going back a little bit more towards a bundling cycle because of that data. It makes it a little easier. But then at the same time, as we build out all this infrastructure, it will get unbundled again, and people will be able to talk to each other through these agents. And I think one like really weird paradigm is it's like you need you need to build software to make it appealing to agents, not humans. Like that's really weird. Like you need to get it so your agent is good at talking to another agent, not good at talking to Eric, not always. And so that's a funny dynamic that I think we're still figuring out.
Yeah, and that reminds me of what I'm going through in content marketing right now. It's like you also have to make content that AI bots will be able to crawl and understand, and make sure you're writing in small chunks and all these weird tips coming about. I think the same will apply to software. I did want to you were talking about the data and how data is the base of all this. I think what's interesting is that what data should sales enablement own? And the way I'm thinking through this is the base of your training information, and maybe content in terms of product information, competitor stuff, things that RevOps might help with the infrastructure, but they might not. Your RevOps team is probably not going to create your competitive documents, right? Or they might help you build something that can crawl the internet or whatever. But so what are the sort of data points that sales enablement might own in this future?
It's a really good question. Maybe I'll start with what the RevOps team I think definitely should own, and then the enablement. I think the RevOps team, or just the operation data team at the company, the CRM data, the stuff, close rates, win rates, all the stuff in Salesforce, right? That type of stuff I think needs to be probably on the RevOps side, and then your product data, right? And that connection, which is how it's always been. I mean, those teams have really always owned that. And I think where enablement starts to own it more is the call data. Although there's definitely a partnership between the call data and that CRM data, because you want to get the call data into the CRM and you want to do triggers. The call is such an important sort of currency and fuel in this world of AI. So that's a place where I think there's some overlap. But then, there's all the client-facing collateral, which is definitely owned by enablement and product marketing. I would say kind of share that responsibility. So that's all your pitch decks, all your one-pagers, your competitor battle cards, all your product one-sheeters, right? There's a ton of really useful messaging and data and things in there that can use to, answer questions and fuel your AI agents. Then there's things like customer-facing collateral in the sense of business cases and QBR decks and customer success plans and project plans. That is that's an important artifact that is used between the enablement person and then the field leaders, right? The sales leader, the customer success leader. And then training data. I think we, as an industry, I think e-learning and the LMS world, it's this necessary evil. I feel like people want to kind of get away from it. It was micro learning was a big trend and still an important way. And obviously it's way better to sit through a short training as opposed to a really long-winded one. That makes a ton of sense. And now AI role play is a really hot category, which is definitely an extension of learning. But every enablement person you talk to still is I still need an LMS. I still need a place to put my trainings and different things like that. And there's obviously a lot of data that gets created via that. And I think that we keep saying this word data, but I think one of the really interesting things with AI is content is data. LLMs, right? Large language models are sifting through all the content, and that's really interesting data that you can use to create things. And so all of the things we're talking about are these artifacts that you can then use to fuel the different agents you want to create across the company.
We launched the Doc AI agent that reps can ask questions, they can get answers really quickly, but that still needs the source information of, what is the information about our product that the reps need. And so that still requires like the content creation step at the very beginning. Like you need your source of truth content. And I think as a marketer too, I'm interested in how this plays out. Like it feels like every company will need this sort of like, I don't know if it's built in a wiki or something that then connects via MCP to something like Doc, but this like, okay, here's all of our products. Here's the messaging for each product. Here's the competitor information. Like all that will need to live somewhere, and we'll need to connect to all these other systems that train reps, right? So maybe someday you don't need to build the course, and the LMS can automatically build the course based on this source data. But like right now, it still seems like the source of truth ends up being these courses or playbooks or wherever that you choose for that content to live.
Totally. And it's like changing so fast, like the different paradigms, the patterns, what tools are hot, which ones you should use. And so I don't know, it's both an exciting time to be building and buying software.
Yeah.
But a really hard time too, because it's all changing. And one thing that is, the coolest, hottest way to do something 6 months ago is completely different now. And so that makes it really hard. Like it's hard to stay on top of things. Yeah, which is exciting too. That's like where I see opportunity as a AI SaaS CEO.
Yeah, it's funny. I see people say like, oh, this tool will scrape your website and have all that data available to your team. And I'm like, well, our website is outdated because our product is developing so quickly because our developers are now using AI to build so many things so quickly. And so like as the marketer, I can't keep up, and I'm trying to enable our team with materials. And so I'm trying to like keep up at the pace of the product we're building as well. So it's like this doubly difficult problem.
Totally. And even on that little example, I mean, I feel like the future is like, I'm like, hey, we launched this new thing, and then boom, agent goes, takes a new thing, hooks up to Figma, makes the graphics, hooks up to Webflows, publishes on the website, right? Like, and then you can approve it or not, right? Like, I think that is kind of where that type of workflows where the world's heading, but we're totally not there yet, right? Like that type, no one's hooked all of that up, but like it feels like we're heading in that direction.
So there's been a lot of hype around AI role play. I think you were just at the Sales Enablement Collective Conference, and AI role play was the thing on the tip of everyone's tongue. Like, how are you feeling right now about that category? And like, I think one interesting question is we've been deciding like, should you build it into Doc? Should you not? And can you just talk through how you're thinking about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's clearly a hot category. People are very excited and intrigued by it. I think there basically was a bunch of exciting point solutions that have been working on this for a couple of years. Like our friends at Hyperbound have been friendly with the CEO, I think is one great example of it. And they seem to be growing fast and working well. So yeah, there's this interesting dynamic of, it's definitely like the hot category. From talking to different enablement leaders, I hear a few things. Like one, enablement people are excited about it because I think, on some level, like the CEO is yelling at everyone to say, do more AI. And this is like a really cool kind of sexy AI thing that works well. Right? Like it can work well for certain organizations. And I think where I've heard that it works well is, during onboarding, right? Like it's like basically more immature reps, I think is where it works well, right? During onboarding or BDR cold calling, like those are the really strong use cases. When I've talked to this dynamic of if you talk to like a more mid-market rep or a more senior rep, they're like, oh, I don't want to do the role play. Like they don't want to kind of do that. And it's sort of less useful to them. They want to learn on the job. They want to learn with coaching via gong calls and things like that. Like sitting around talking to a bot can be weird. But it works well, again, on sort of like you're a younger sales rep. And then if it's a super transactional sale, right? If you're saying the same things and it's a scripted sale, then it also, I think, is a really strong use case for it. But enterprise sales, where it's so much relationship building and nuance and stuff, it's like a little less of a use case where it works well. And maybe the models will evolve and stuff. The other really interesting dynamic is who should build this technology, which you kind of touched on. A bunch of the point solutions, at least to my knowledge of how they work, it's a lot of, prompts that you stitch together with automation and things. But we just talked to Stacy, the head of enablement at Gong yesterday. And I think one of the really interesting things with Gong Enable, who's doing role play, is that their role play that you talk to on the other side is like based off of all of your calls. So if you're talking to this scary procurement person, you want to practice that, they're actually building a model based off your different calls and using that in the role play, which seems amazing. Like that it's actually based on real data as opposed to prompting. So I think that's a really exciting model, and I think it really makes sense for companies like Gong to do this. And might make less sense for big enablement platforms like Dot to do it. But we'll see. I think it is an interesting technology, and as a CEO, you're always trying to find kind of what's everyone buying, right? You obviously want to be a part of it. The other little anecdote on this, going back to kind of what I hear from AEs, is one funny dynamic is AEs sometimes are just trying to figure out how they pass the role play as opposed to getting better at their job. We heard that from somebody. So I thought that was kind of a funny dynamic with this. But it's definitely cool technology, and it's a great kind of like initial AI use case, which will be exciting. I think where it gets more interesting is, can we take AI role plays and actually turn into AI sellers? I think is a really kind of futuristic thing, which would be cool.
Yeah, I can imagine if you have this like internally motivated seller who is like, how can I get more reps on calls without having more calls? Like, I really want to get better. I want to get better at this one thing. Then AI role play can play a big role for them. But if there's someone who's like, this is a checkbox I have to do to get through my quarterly on training, whatever, then it might be more of an internal rep motivation thing than like the availability of the tool.
Totally. And like, you listen to a lot of the demos on people's website, and it's like still feels AI-y. It's one of those things where we started the conversation where it will get better. Like the role plays you're doing today, 10 years from now, are going to be radically different. And so that's one of those where, yeah, I don't know, the model development will really change it.
You mentioned this with respect to AI role play, and I think it's why it's catching on, is if a CEO comes to the enablement team and says, we need to be doing more with AI. And I think part of it too is like, here's $20,000, go buy some AI. Like AI role play was an easy thing to add to the budget, right? But if you were an enablement leader right now and your CEO came to say that to you, like, what advice would you have for those people? Like, what is sort of like a healthy approach to AI look like right now?
Yeah, I wouldn't just go buy software that checks the box, honestly. Yeah. As much as I'd love for you to go buy Doctor that just checks the box, I don't think that's the right approach. I think you need to start with the data. You need to kind of get your data in place and what is most important, and like start with that layer and partner with the RevOps team and sort of come up with a game plan to make sure it's usable. Because any of the systems that you want to potentially use are going to kind of require that. So I think that's kind of step one. And then I think it's like what every enablement person should be good at, which is prioritization. Is what are the things that are going to make the biggest impact on the outcome of the business as opposed to vanity metrics, right? So it's not just trainings completed, but it's like, what are the goals that sales leadership wants to do? Is it close rates? Is it, sales velocity? Is it, close rates related to a new product launch and different things like that? And what are the things we can do to get better at that? So, let's say you want to increase win rates, and you're really bad at doing business cases. Maybe a place where you want to start and sort of that roadmap is, AI generated business cases. But maybe, a pain point is that your sales team is spending too much time writing handoff notes, right? And they're wasting a lot of time, and there's just wasting time, and there's too much process. Like that might be a place to start. So I think it goes back to what enablement people are good at anyway, which is coming up with what are the business outcomes, coming with a prioritized list, and then thinking through some ideas on how AI can solve it. And then like there is just a lot of experimentation. Like if you have the resources on your team, I think like the VPs of enablement are not going to have time to mess with these tools. And so you need to empower the people on your team to bubble up different ideas. I think I feel really strongly about that. And so giving them access, letting them play around with things, whether it's Claude Code or other stuff, to kind of come up with ideas as it's all changing, I also think is really important.
Yeah. And if I could give some advice from, like, I've been very AI forward from the second the tools were available to me, being the only marketer at Doc. It was like, okay, AI is going to be the thing that I'm going to do that's going to make us be able to, sort of compete with large marketing teams. And I think at the beginning, I rushed out to build all kinds of workflows and tools for myself. And then now that we're kind of 2 years into this, I realized that data infrastructure layer that you talked about is like really what I need to succeed with AI, because like the tools will keep getting better that I can put on top of things, but what I really need is like a very good base layer. So for example, we have this podcast we're recording now, and I have it in a database. I have the transcripts in there, all the video clips we make, and now I've made like a database that can like make use of that content, and that connects into my like content updating engine. But before when it was just like, okay, make a doc writer that writes in our writing style, like that wasn't that useful because I didn't have anything to feed into it. And so now we have the podcast. I built like a really good competitor database. They've got all this like baseline research. I'm trying to standardize like where our product information sits so that it can feed into this. So like now that I have that layer more built out, it's like a lot easier for me to make better use of AI as other tools come up.
Yeah. And like the easy place for enablement people to start is like calls. Like if you don't have a call recorder, like go buy that immediately and then figure out. And then once you have it, I'm going to assume most mature organizations do, that's a really easy place for you to start to kind of connect the dots when it comes to enablement and just, the reinforcement on the things that people are learning and those goals that you talked about with the sales team. Like this is like, there's no better place than your call recorder, whether it's Gong or Fathom or place to try and start to figure out. And all these tools start to, have they have their own AI tools now. You can start asking questions in the Clary call recorder, the Gaunt, whatever it is, to start to kind of connect the dots. So that's like a super easy place to start.
Okay, final question, bit of a meta one, is like selling AI. So we've been selling AI at Doc for, let's say, over a year now. What have you learned in terms of what it takes to sell AI products that was different from more like predictable SaaS products?
I'll preface this with like, we're still figuring it out. But I think one interesting dynamic with AI products is they can all kind of look the same on the surface. Like support, if you're selling a support chat, right? Like they all have the same little chat window and you can be like, our AI is better than this one. And so I actually heard Des, who's one of the founders and the CPO at Intercom, talk about this problem where, these are iceberg products, right? Like they all look the same, but what's behind them is super different. And so I think one of the interesting things he had mentioned is they kind of give like a list of questions to ask their chatbot versus somebody else's. And there's some gotcha questions that like Intercom's better at answering than, whoever the next competitor is. So I thought that was super interesting. The other challenging dynamic with AI, as we've talked about this a lot, is the data layer. So, on a demo, it's really hard and like to prove that your AI is better if you don't upload the customer's data into your system. But there's this catch-22 of like, they might not want to upload their data because of security concerns if you're not an approved vendor yet. And so how do you overcome that dynamic in the sales process is incredibly interesting. The easy way to do it is you do more pilots, right? And you say, okay, let's do a small subset, whether that's, a long pilot, short pilot, whatever, but you do some subset of the data to sort of test and see if it's working, right? And you do give the vendor just enough data to kind of get a sense of, like what's the overall output going to be. But that's another really interesting challenge. And then maybe the last one I'll mention is pricing, I think is incredibly interesting. Like paying by token and usage-based pricing is definitely like the hot, exciting thing. And maybe the more exciting thing people talk about is a lot of like outcome-based pricing, right? Like you're paying for the work, not just like seats, right? But I think this works really well in some industries. It works really well in actually engineering because engineering and infrastructure are always used to doing this. It has always been kind of usage based. Like our server bills go up if people use it more, and we're used to doing that. And the whole industry is used to doing that. And it's worked well for like companies like Clay because those tools are often like single player in the sense where it's like one RevOps person or maybe a couple are just in there like, scraping leads and enriching data, and they have a credit card and they can just keep buying more as they run into problems. Like those are empowered. But at least in our dynamic, I don't think CFOs want to give every AE access to a credit card with tokens, and they want more predictable pricing. And so this is like a really interesting dynamic that we have as we sell Doc, and we've decided in the short term just include it in sort of our flat rate fee as we include it and take a lot of the complexity out. Because as soon as you start to try and sell tokens and things, it gets really complex because people are like, "Wait, how much token am I going to use?" And you're like, I don't know, like you've never used it before, like that catch-22. And if you don't have enough data internally to be confident and say, here's what we do, like that's a really tricky dynamic. And so we've opted to sort of not do that. But then there's the cost side of AI where you do need to be charging because the stuff can be expensive and eats to your margin. So that's something I think we're still figuring out, people are figuring out. But yeah, the pricing dynamic has been an interesting lesson. I'm really happy actually with like going for flat rate pricing in the short term because it's made sales honestly a lot easier.
Yeah, it's hard to have a flexible line item in the budget. It's not classically how sales enablement has worked. So Perfect. Well, that's a great place to end today. Alex, thanks so much for your thoughts on AI. I'm sure this won't be the last time we talk about it. It'll probably come up in every single episode going forward. But yeah, it was really fun to chat today. Thanks everyone for listening to Grow and Tell. You can catch us at growandtellshow.com, YouTube, Spotify, Apple, all those great things. Thank you for listening and have a great day.
Thanks, everybody.